them, you should feel free to be in touch. Many of you have also said that you wanted to see each of these members of Team CEA, and so maybe you should also get some selfies taken with them as well. And some of them are not here, so tomorrow we'll do the individual introductions to. Oh, Ananya is also, so we'll do that. A few things came up at lunchtime which I thought were very interesting. First of all, we sent you a survey before the course began. We have actually seen that, and I did find that very useful, thinking about what we should be doing over this week. Similarly, what we're going to do is that we're going to send you a survey monkey today, a fairly simple one, but if you could take the trouble to fill it in and send it back to us, so we'll have a look at it tomorrow. It'll have some very simple, basic questions asking for feedback, and feel free to. Of course, there are no restrictions on praise, but there are also no restrictions on criticism either. So you can do, you're free to do, but you should do both. At least the criticism, very much so. One very interesting and very important question came up at lunchtime, which is something that I have always felt, and with my team I've discussed this a lot, is one of the challenges for pedagogy for all of you is, is the absolutely, stunning and somewhat, unavoidable fact that this generation of students reads less and less. They're all stuck to their iPhones or cell phones, and they have distracted attention spans, limited attention spans. So how do you therefore, get them to read stuff? And I don't have good answers for that. But my one sort of suggestion would be that you get them to maybe read blogs a little bit more, economics blogs. And we could give you, I could tell you the 3 or 4 blogs that I read every day, but I think there are several others as well. And I think maybe that's one thing that you may want to encourage your students to do a bit more, and especially if depending upon what the subject matter is, of course. That any other ideas for limited attention spans? How do you get students to read?
You probably download apps on the phone, newspapers or whatever, because reading newspapers has become.
Also, podcasts are another possibility. Podcasts. I don't know. I don't listen to podcasts myself, but I can see that. If you're traveling on the train or a bus, car, whatever, traveling long distances, working out, whatever. I don't know what all these youngsters do these days, but I think that would be another source of. There are actually good economic podcasts from time to time, on global inequality or all kinds of things. So I think that I don't know how many good Indian economic podcasts there are. We'll check around and we'll try and see whether we can find something. I think, but it's a really good and important question to which the other thing that came up, which I guess I should be thinking about and maybe talking to people as well, is many of you have said that your course syllabus is fairly kind of constricting, that it's you don't have too much freedom within, you're given a syllabus, you have to teach to that, also you have to teach to the exam. So how much freedom you have on that is something that, so maybe, try and get the UGC or the minister to, the good news is that the minister's son is a very good economist, so, I think we can, use that angle to, for economics, we can try and get something done. But it is I think a good question that came up. Some other questions, other things that came up was, one person said at lunch that we thought that you'd only be doing the first session, and we're disappointed that you're doing all of them. So, so I'm, and someone else said, sir, I don't know about content, but we'll certainly, going to use the jokes that you cracked in class. So, I have we have to have copyright not just on the material, but also the jokes. And okay, so with that, but I think there's some very good questions that came up. I think we should think about that. And so we head into the penultimate session. Tomorrow we're going to do a demonetization and India's big challenges. So that we'll end on that. So today we sorry. I'll send you some. We'll put together a few blogs and we can send that. Okay, so one of the kind of hot topics in development more generally, and and also something that not just economists but political scientists have written a lot about, is more and more the view that what matters for long-run development is, what you can either call public institutions, the quality and effectiveness of public institutions, or you can call that state capacity. That's a key determinant of long-run development. I mean, this is more and more, a lot of the research is showing that. Douglas North, who won the Nobel Prize about 10, 15 years ago, he was one of the pioneers of institutional economics. Since early 2000s, a lot of work has been done in the late 90s. And the view is that basically if you plot any measure of institutions, political or economic, and plotted long-run economic development measured by, say, per capita GDP, you will in fact get a very strong correlation like this, a very strong correlation. And so there's growing evidence and very compelling evidence that institutions matter. But then no sooner have you said this than people say, what do you mean by institutions? And what are institutions? So this is one way of thinking about institutions, and really, so a view that says, look, it's not about state or public institutions versus markets, but they have a kind of relationship with each other, which we can describe using this schema. So you could argue that there are 5 key economic functions that public institutions perform even in a market system. So one, actually public institutions create markets. For example, if you didn't have protection of property rights, if you didn't have basic law and order, if you didn't have contracts being sacred, I mean, you wouldn't have any form of investment in the first place. So, for example, in a war-torn area, or like in India, for example, in areas where there's a lot of Maoist activity, you're not going to find a lot of institutions, a lot of investment, and therefore economic growth. So, therefore, institutions perform a very important function of creating markets, and hence you need, a good police force. Because you need law and order, you need a good judiciary that's going to look at protection of property rights and sanctity of contracts. So this is why institutions like the police and the judiciary are fundamental to even any market institution. Then institutions also regulate and correct markets. We've just done the thing on infrastructure. We know that there are market failures in terms of monopolies, externalities, and so on, asymmetric information. And so you need institutions to correct for that. In the telecom area, we have TRAI, electricity CERC, you have the Competition Commission of India to prevent against abuse of monopolistic positions, dominant practices. You have the food safety, you have the National Green Tribunal. So you need institutions like this to actually correct market failures and to regulate markets. So that's a second very important function that institutions perform. Less well understood but very important is public institutions actually legitimize markets. They legitimize markets because you need public mechanisms for social protection and redistribution. If you get too much inequality in society, I think markets will get discredited, as they are beginning to be all over the world because of very high levels of inequality. So you need safety nets, And in some ways, of course, you need democracy itself to say, basically you say that at least processes are legitimate, and pensions for old age and poor, government programs, for example, that do redistribution, these are very important for legitimizing markets. And therefore, the corollary is that you need effective bureaucracy to administer good government programs, to administer social safety nets, and so that's another function of institutions. Then institutions stabilize markets. I mean, the RBI, for example, is an institution that maintains macroeconomic and financial stability. Similarly, SEBI, that regulates the stock market. I mean, when we had all these scandals in the stock market, there's a lot of uncertainty, there's a lot of instability, and that too can affect economic activity. So we need institutions like RBI and SEBI. And finally, we need institutions to complement markets. I mean, if you say what is the Chinese government very good at doing, I mean, they're very, very good at providing essential services such as health and education, public goods, public investment, and so on. So once again, you see you need a competent bureaucracy, a competent set of public agents that can deliver on these services that complement markets. So I very much think of public institutions not as in an antagonistic relationship with markets. And it's a point that maybe this is not right, but maybe this is how one should think more about states and markets, not as one or the other, but how the two can work together to create the best possible outcomes. And I very much like this way of thinking about them as what are the functions that public institutions perform. So what I want you to take away from this is that it's a kind of mutually reinforcing potentially relationship. So it's not either or. Second, there are some economic functions that public institutions perform, and they have their counterparts in actual kind of institutions like police, judiciary, regulatory institutions, RBI, an effective bureaucracy, and so on. So you get both this overarching scheme of how you think about these things. You also see what functions they perform in a market system, and also what they translate down to in terms of actual government institutions that you are familiar with and can recognize. Yeah.
North also talks about the great importance of informal institutions apart from formal institutions. And in fact, even Williamson says it's a level 1 institution. So for most other countries, they have some kind of a homogeneous informal institution in terms of the national culture. Whereas in India, it's extremely heterogeneous in terms of the norms, mores, the rules, religion, these other aspects of informal institutions. And the second aspect is that it's also undergoing change through the winds of globalization. So how do we think about informal institutions? How do you factor it into your overall thinking here?
So I think that for the purposes, of course, I haven't added in this, civil society and all this, because I'm focusing here on public institutions. I'm not focusing on, non-public institutions like, and then you can get culture, you can get norms, those are things that, we can devote a whole separate session on. But here I'm focusing, that's why I'm using the role public institutions. So I'm not so this is not to say that informal institutions are not important, cultural institutions are not important, but here I want to focus just on public institutions. But there's a whole literature on norms and for example, even if you want to talk about gender issues in India, there's no way of getting away from patriarchy and so on. And NGOs, civil society has of course a very important role to play as well. But here I just want to focus on public institutions, and this is the way I certainly think about issues of state capacity and things. This is the way I think about it. Now, what I'm going to therefore now show you a little bit is what are some indicators of effectiveness of state capacity or public institutions. I mean, I'm just going to run through some. The first, this is a work by Milan Vaishnav at the Carnegie Endowment, and this is something that Professor Devesh Kapoor has done some work on. Is contrary to popular belief, the Indian state is not very big. The problem is that it's probably in some ways not big enough. So this is a measure of, public employees per 10,000 residents. And you find that if you look across the world, I mean, India is, it may not be the lowest. I don't know how it would look if you had all the countries, but certainly India is among the countries that has fewer people. Now, again, this is just a simple indicator. Maybe there are economies of scale in this, and therefore, it may be that bigger countries need fewer employees per population than smaller countries because, there's some fixed costs in delivering, all these services that I spoke about. But still, India doesn't come out as a country with a, I mean, the Indian state may have a lot of problems, but having too many people is, at least in the aggregate, is not at least the most important one. So,
contrary to popular belief that Indian state is big enough, not big enough.
the Indian state is not big enough. The popular belief actually is that Indian state is very big.
So there are two negatives.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, we'll clarify that. Okay. Another indicator of state capacity is, number of police officers per capita, and amongst the G20 at least, India is again not the, it's well below the median for G20 countries. Armed forces, I like to look at these data because I've never seen them compiled. What you find is that there's actually, but where does the shortage come up in this? Oh, this is the number, sorry, the number of, so this is the number of unfilled vacancies in this, sorry, exactly. And you find that Army, Navy, Air Force, especially the Army, huge number of unfilled vacancies, shortage of officers, which tells you that, there's severe understaffing. I mean, just as an aside, if you think about IIT Delhi, India's, it's probably the institutions that made it to the top list. The faculty vacancy in this, I was speaking to the director, in India's premier institution is about 35 to 40%. 35 to 40% staff vacancies there. And this is in India's best institution. That's also another indicator of, I see some laughter here. I take it that in your institutions there's excess capacity and not, it's worse, okay, it's worse. Okay, but these are all actually quite striking statistics which I wanted to kind of share with you. Judiciary, again, same vacancies as percentage of sanction. Look at the high courts, about 45% shortage of staff in the, so again, and it's no surprise therefore that if you look at the backlog of cases, Supreme Court, High Courts, District Courts, I mean, that's not 27 lakhs, that's 27 millions, that's 276 lakhs. Here in the High Courts, it's 38 lakhs of cases that have not been decided yet. So remember now, going back to this, so if you think about this, for example, you immediately see that if you believe that a judiciary is important to create markets, then you see straight away that something like this, it's not going to be conducive to. That's why you'll get the kind of the picture that you saw, the electricity thing, people going around the system, and but in some ways these are not just statistics, but these are things that really impede economic development in very important ways. So in some ways you could say the puzzle of the Indian state is this, it's terrific at managing complex tasks, conducting elections, sending a mission to Mars. Think about it, we conduct a census for 1.2 billion people every year. And of course, this is everyone's favorite example. We organize the largest temporary city in the world, the Kumbh Mela. And yet, we fail in relatively simple ones: primary education, public health, water and sanitation. We're effective in managing one of the world's largest armed forces. And please don't tell my colleagues in North Block, we're not very effective at managing public service bureaucracies. So now, I have a kind of way of, not explaining this. It's partial explanation, but not explanation. Is that the way I think about is the following. You see, any system of public institutions, it works well where there's accountability. So I think that what happens with these things is that we get what I call episodic accountability. If we have to do one-off, we get accountability, but on an ongoing basis. I mean, this you have to do once in a while, this you have to do all the time, and it's easier to mobilize kind of people around these big events. So, if you say, because in India we care so much deeply about elections, if elections, anything happens, we, I think, as a nation, express our anger and we almost demand that we have good elections, and that's why we get good elections. We demand that during the Kumbh Mela, be good organized, and it's easy to do it one-off, but and I'm going to argue tomorrow that this is in some ways a failure of, a failure, a very deep failure, not of, blaming someone at the top, but in some ways, something about democratic politics is failing, which leads to the fact that we don't deliver these basic services very well. So this is just a simple, for you to, whet your appetite and get you into thinking about state capacity and institutions. There's a very good book that's recently come out, released by Professor Kapoor, Pratap Mehta and Milan Vaishnav. It's just been released. They have chapters on the bureaucracy, on BDOs, because when you think about state capacity, you can think about so many different institutions that perform these functions. You can talk about the regulatory institutions, you can talk about the RBI, you can talk about SEBI, and you can talk about why some have done well, others have not well, why have done certain things done well at certain points in time, but not in other points in time. We saw, for example, that we had low inflation for a long time, and then we had 8 years of high, 6, 7 years of very high inflation. So it's both that some do well, others don't do well. Some things do well at certain points in time, but not in other points in time. So it's really a very fascinating, rich field of inquiry. It's a very fascinating and rich field also for us, all of us Indians, to think about. Fundamentally, I think that if we could get good institutions, we'd be a different country. So just to reassure you, all your Marxist friends here, my Marxist friends here, that I actually believe that it's much more important to get good public institutions. I think markets will happen on their own. You don't have to do a lot to get markets. And I really believe that if you get good public institutions, I think the problem of development is solved. But of course, how you get good public institutions is the big, big open question. Yeah, exactly. Rethinking public institutions. It's just come out, and you should use it as reference material. There's a lot of data in it. For example, how are civil servants recruited? Things on the IAS. Lots of very good data on police, and you should and it's also very good source material. Some of the data here has come from that book, but it's something that I think you should expose students to. Now, one related aspect of state capacity is fiscal capacity. The ability of the government to be able to get resources from people in order to deliver services. Now, I'm going to first, I know there are some very important political people in this audience, and this is aimed in particular at my political friends here, and it's something that I think we don't understand, and I want to share with you, what I think is absolutely a first order fact about economic development. You see, we think about taxation in this country. You can look at it in two ways. Why do you need to tax? You need to tax because government spends, and it has to tax people. So you can say, you tax because you need to spend, and spending is the primary objective of governments, and therefore you need to tax. So taxation is almost, and it is in some ways, a necessary evil, because after all, remember, taxation is expropriation. I mean, you are forcibly taking away from people what is rightfully theirs. Let's not forget that taxation is a kind of expropriation. It is a kind of thing because you're going against, you're taking away from a private citizen what his rightfully is. But we, as society, we condone that. We say we do this because we think also that the government has to provide health, education, law and order, all the economic functions that a state has to perform. We need to finance that. To me, actually, that is a secondary function of taxation. The first function of taxation, I think, and this relates to some of the themes we have spoken about. See, in every society, citizens have rights which they can expect from the state. As I said, all these services, but they also have some responsibilities. We think of voting as a responsibility. We can also think of paying taxes as a responsibility. Now, but even that I would say is a slightly kind of coercive way of looking at it. The most important reason why I think we need taxation is because taxation is what creates the glue between citizens and state. You see, you get this glue politically via elections, via all kinds of accountability mechanism. You have elections, so the citizen, can hold the state responsible. Similarly, when you pay taxes, you actually have skin in the game to hold the government accountable and responsible. You say, I've done my part of the bargain. You, the state, now you have to fulfill that part of the bargain. And this creates institutions in the long run. The flip side of what I'm saying here is exactly when this is missing, is when you get the natural resource curse and the aid curse and all those forms, that when governments get this money free via tax, via aid or this, they no longer have the incentive to actually create institutions and be accountable to their own people. So taxation is absolutely the economic glue that creates this citizenship between this glue between citizens and states, and historically has been shown to be the key measure or metric by which, or a reason for which institutions, both political and economic institutions, develop over time. So I think that the perspective on taxation that I would like you to convey to your students, at least one perspective, is that taxation is actually fundamental to political and economic development. Without it, you don't have good economic institutions. Now, a corollary to that is that it does seem to be that there's a difference between economic direct taxes and indirect taxes. I think that when you pay income taxes or fees is when you think you have skin in the game. When you pay indirect taxes, it gets lost. Everyone pays GST, everyone pays VAT, and you don't even know you're paying VAT. But when you pay income taxes or when you pay certain fees for certain benefits you get from the state, then you say, hey, I've paid for this, I want my due, I want to hold whoever's I'm paying it to actually deliver. So when we say taxation is the glue to development, we also mean that, especially income taxes and fees that we pay are integral to, I say this because, some people think that because income taxes lead to corruption, that we should have no income taxes at all. And that, I think, would actually go against all development experience of, and there's a very big literature in development economics that says that state capacity and taxation are very intimately linked, and that state capacity is linked to long-run development, and state capacity is related to taxation capacity. So in turn, taxation capacity is a key ingredient of long-run development. So think of taxes not as something that they do to pay for expenditure, but taxation is our skin in the game as citizens. Just as we hold our politicians responsible for political outcomes, taxation is how we, put ourselves in and hold governments responsible for economic outcomes. This has become a bit of a lecture rather than my brief excursion into, preaching. I have a very preaching tone the last 5 minutes. My apologies for that. But It's partly provoked by the presence of some very powerful people here to whom I want to pass on a message. And I'm joking, of course, but I think this is a perspective on taxation that's very, very important. And when we teach taxation, we completely neglect this perspective. We talk about, what are the distortions, what are the, the corruption, etc., etc. But I think, miss what I think is actually the primary reason why we should have income taxes in every society. And what happens when you don't, you get all the pathologies related to the, natural resource curves. For example, why is it that almost oil, or so many oil economies are dictatorships? It's partly because they have no accountability to the citizens. They can just give out this money free. And so, you don't get that accountability. So I think that's a very important insight of development economics that I would like you to keep. Now, I'm going to now also do something now, both to present some facts, but also to kind of highlight a kind of pedagogical, methodological issue that I want to highlight here. Okay, so the question comes up often, does India tax too much or too little? Often it comes up, and you will find that every time. Do we spend too much? Do we tax too much? How do we even assess this question? So, I'm going to tell you at the end of this, I'm going to take you through 4 steps and totally confuse you. Because I'm going to tell you that the answer is totally confused, and if you give me a very clean answer, I will fail you in this exam because you haven't understood the complexity of this. So, level 1. One way to look at whether we tax or spend too much, this is from the economic survey. First, let's just look at the total expenditure column. You put up this, you say, India tax to GDP is 16.6%. By the way, this is both central government and state governments. 16, about 17% of GDP. And OECD 34, emerging market 21.4. So we are well below even emerging markets average. So answer this question at level number 1, India taxes too little. Okay, so that's one perspective. But we know, for example, that that's not the right way to assess. Remember my relative to what question? We know that over time, as countries become richer, they actually tax more. So when you ask this question, you have to say, do we tax too much or too little relative to our level of income? And so this is a plot, tax to GDP on the y-axis, log GDP per capita on the x-axis, and what you find is India is actually very close to the line, and so India doesn't tax too little for its level of development, because we know over time, for many reasons, over time your state capacity gets better, incomes rise, people want more services, so they're willing to pay more taxes. So you have to control for that regularity, and therefore when you do that, you find that in fact what you find is in fact the Scandinavian countries are the ones that tax too much. And then you will also find, by the way, that if you added oil countries here, you will find that they tax too little because they get all this money from oil. So, but if you took away those, this is a chart that takes away the oil countries because they're very special. We know that they're going to be outliers, but for all the other countries, India taxes too little. So, does India tax too much, too little? Simple cross-country comparison, too little. Controlling for the level of development, not little at all. But so 25, 50, but it's still not. Now, we know that this is not enough, because we know that democracies have a very special relationship with taxation. We know, for example, that democracies, there's a very simple thing called the median voter theorem in politics, that think about it crudely this way. If you want to win an election, you have to appeal to the middle guy, because you want to win a majority, you want to win the guy in the middle and all those say below him, right? So the median voter theorem says that if you want to win that guy, you have to redistribute, because in these societies there will be inequality, the inequality means that the guy in the middle is making less than the average, and therefore in order to get all those people, you will have to redistribute more. So democracies will have a tendency to actually tax more. And since India is a democracy, the relevant comparison is not, or one important comparison is not whether India taxes too little or too much relative to its level of development, but also given the fact that it's a democracy, and bingo. Oh, so this is the theory. There's a very famous book by Daron Acemoglu, and basically democracies, when they extended the... Remember, you have to understand there were two kinds of democracies that were created. We all think, I can guarantee, and this is because I'm saying this because I too thought that, you grow up in India, you think that democracies happen like this because that's how it happened in India. But that's not, India is very much the exception. Most cases, democracies began with limited franchise, with limited voting rights. And systematically, these voting rights were extended to different groups of people. And at every point of time, when they expanded the franchise, they had to do more redistribution in order to accommodate people and bring people along. So when you ask the question of whether India taxes too much or too little, you have to control for democracy. And then when you do that, you find that actually India taxes too little. So just looking at taxes, India taxes too little. If you control for the level of development...
Can I make a point?
Yeah, one quick question.
I think it's about the perception. In India, we think we are not getting anything in lieu
No,
of...
so I'm going to come to that. I'm going to ask a question. I'll ask a question and then we'll... If it's only a question, only I have the right to make speeches here. Or only I have the right to preach. Huh? Clear doubts, yeah. But no speeches. You're clearing doubts.
So see now, we charge tax for economic development, but our tax is charged in such a way that poor are paying more tax and rich are less. And the middle class income, when the inequality of income increases, the income distribution goes from middle to poor people.
So
my doubt is that why we impose tax in such a manner where rich are benefiting much, and why do we not have some system where we charge a less tax from poor so we can reduce the inequality of income?
Can I say that? Can I accuse you? Can I accuse you? Can I accuse you of not listening to me? Remember that when we did the section on middle class subsidies, I said that in terms of income taxes, only the top 5% of Indians pay income taxes. So the poor don't pay income taxes at all.
Sir, I have one question.
No, okay, my friends now, okay, no speeches.
Only question.
Top 5% paying a tax, then also I think.
No. Now you're making.
Corruption is there, sir. Corruption is there.
Okay, we'll come to corruption.
I do not agree with these capitalist, very rich business houses who are paying tax. No. Corporate tax. They get a lot of subsidies than tax.
First let's look at the facts and then let's have arguments. All I want to say is that if you look at the actual data, only 5% of Indians pay taxes. Income taxes. Of course, you could argue that income taxes are, they also pay indirect taxes, but we know the way our GST and everything is done, we try and exempt goods that are mostly consumed by the poor. So, I mean, I'm not saying that, no, you can't shake your hands, that's the evidence. If you want to say, I believe what I believe, that I will be evidence. So Raj Krishna used to say that Indians are knowledge proof. Let's not be evidence proof here. Let's look at the facts and then we'll come to the...
My question is based on evidence only.
Evidence.
We started with universal adult franchise system, where the universal voting system. Now we are heading towards more restrictive form, like the education or child norms or different norms are putting. So,
sorry, are we preventing anyone from voting, my friend?
Yeah, like in Panchayat election, we are saying that the people who want to contest, they should have this much education level or this much population.
Okay, so that's... I think let's have a class on political theory, and we will discuss those aspects of politics, and as and when it happens. But let's first no. But I think that but more seriously that it's possible that in some cases for some things we actually I don't know the facts. I've also read about this, but that's a political thing that I don't want to get into. Let's talk about politics later.
How it is related to development? Because as the developed world, their growth picked up, they extended the voting rights of whatever decision
exactly.
making rights.
No,
but here we started with very low level of development.
Good point. So that I'll talk about that explicitly tomorrow. Is there something called a democracy tax on development? We can talk about that tomorrow. We'll certainly talk about that.
So how is this data calculated?
Okay, all the data we'll get, we will tell you exactly. This is from the economic survey. What the sources are, we'll give you all of that. Don't worry about that. This is now only questions. Only questions.
We see that this table, and then I think their question is quite valid.
Please give my friend the mic. I need to.
No, you see, I don't know the simple cross-country comparison so that India under tax and taxation. This was the table.
Yeah.
You see this here, India, the income tax is 5% of the 5.6% of the total GDP, whereas indirect tax is 10.1%. And therefore, indirect taxes are paid by everybody depending upon what are the goods and services consumed. And there, yesterday you have shown that on that gold and other thing, tax is less. So this means those are the commodity which is consumed by masses, they are taxed more. And therefore, by
the other way around.
No, if the gold is taxed less, let us say I am just taking, like you take extreme example. I am taking extreme example.
No, see, my friend. Now, can I say, my friend? You see. I'll tell you. With due respect to my politician friend here, this is a political tactic. You look at all the evidence. There'll be one exception, and he will say, "Look, pick up the exception and say, see, I told you, sir, dismissed."
Sir, economic question.
No, economic question, please. No, but it's true that, remember that I told you also that in the CPI basket, about 60% of that goods are exempted from taxes because they are the items of mass consumption. Yeah, but I also said there are some cases where we also give subsidies to the rich. So the two are completely consistent. Gold is a case where we give subsidies to the rich, but that doesn't mean we do it everywhere, because most of the items consumed by the poor are taxed at 0 or very low rates, and the poor don't pay income taxes. See, let's get into whether more broadly the poor benefit or not benefit, but in terms of the data, no politician, you can't use political tactics, a politician's tactic of just conveniently picking the example that suits you. My friend, this is evidence proof. Even my politician friend here doesn't do that.
Sir,
Yeah, okay.
Sir, Taibo hypothesis says that there are two approaches of taxation: low tax and less work, more tax, more work. So what kind of approach which India should go ahead with this tax philosophy in the light of Taibo hypothesis?
Can we, let's come to that philosophical question at the end. I want to go through all the data, and then we can discuss the Taibo hypothesis. Yeah, but please.
When taxes can be seen as an economic glue, it is easy to understand when we consider the purpose of taxation as price of public goods or public services. But when we consider tax as a tool for redistribution and stabilization purposes, as suggested by Musgrave, then how that economic glue will work?
As I just said, glue, if you want to legitimize markets and have sustainability, you need to do redistribution as well. But I'm going to talk about both. See, so remember, so I spoke about the glue, but there's also the redistribution, okay? Tomorrow, I will bring both these things together in the last lecture, how these two fit in. But so please, my friends, I have to, when I come to this, I will answer this question. Please make sure that I answer this, because there's a very deep insight, a deep question in what you just asked, and I'm going to answer that tomorrow because it's very, very important. What you said, how do you balance redistribution with providing public services? It's a brilliant question, and I'll come back to that at the, that's something I will deal with at some length. Yeah? Yeah, last question, yeah, one.
There are around 4 to 5 crore taxpayers.
I'm coming to taxpayers, I'll just come, yeah.
If we take the number of persons in a family at around 4, so it would be around 16 to 17 crore persons belonging to families that are paying taxes. And if 50% is workforces in agriculture, so we have around 60 crores who are in non-agriculture, whom the government of India can tax, not the state government. So then we have around 1/3 or 25% of the population, non-agricultural population, that is paying taxes. So
Okay, so I'll come to the number of taxpayers. I'm coming to that, huh? And we'll go into exactly that question as well.
Sir, just a question.
Question.
Opinion I don't have.
Yeah, like me, you're like me. We have no opinions. Give the mic.
Sir,
My friend, what, you haven't converted him after 2 days, you know.
holding him.
Yeah. Okay.
See, he's with me for last 2 decades, but I can't do anything.
That means he's really evidence proof, my friend. Yeah. Okay.
Sir, can you elaborate on China? Because that's very interesting. If you compare, the China is also here in the log GDP also, and in the democracy also, the CHI, this is...
CHI is Chile, CHN is China.
Where is that, sir?
So, do we find China here? No, that's CHI. Oh, okay, let's look into that and see. We'll come back. Just see where China is, please. Because by the way, China, they pay income taxes. They pay quite a bit of income taxes. And I'm going to show you a chart. I'm going to show you a chart on that. Okay, so remember that. Okay, so level 1, India pays too little. Controlling for income, it pays too much. Doesn't pay too little. Controlling for democracy, it still pays too little. But here's the thing, right? I mean, so at one level you could say, therefore, we don't pay enough taxes. But I think you have to also take into account how these things happened over history. If you look at the history of development of the income tax in other countries, and the size of the state, essentially what you find is that the income tax was instituted in the United States in 1913 at considerably many years into development. Okay, so it's not that they started taxing very early either. They they became independent in 1776. They only had the income tax in 1913. They had a brief period of the income tax during their civil war, but it went away. But basically 1913. Similarly, and so if you compare independent India with post-Civil War America or post-Great Depression America, we are not, and this is, now on the x-axis, we have T means the time. That is, so for India, the clock is going to begin in 1947. For post-Civil War America, T for the green line means, 1865 or something like that. And for the orange line, it would be what, 1930, 33, whatever it is. We can tell you what it is. But the point is that when you make these assessments, you also have to understand a country's history. Many of these countries actually, if you look at their income taxation, it goes up after the Great Depression and after World War II. So it's not as if, India is particularly bad in some way and these guys were particularly good. They faced these shocks in a way that India didn't, because it is a historical fact, and Charles Tilly is one of the great political scientists. His biggest insight was that war made the state and the state made war, i.e. those countries that had lots of wars had to finance those wars, and therefore in order to fight and finance wars, they would raise more taxes. I mean, it's a complete historical fact that in the Civil War in America, the North beat the South. There are all kinds of reasons, but they had many more resources because they could tax more. When Napoleon was king, in the Napoleonic Wars between the UK and France, finally UK could prevail because the UK could raise more taxes by issuing bonds and things in a way that France couldn't. So wars make states and states make war. The fact that India has not experienced shocks of such large magnitudes like wars, so that has in fact actually maybe one of the reasons why we don't tax as much as the states. Also, Western democracies, they got into high levels of income taxes, 150, 200 years into their development process, and so, and India didn't. Now, so level 1 we tax too little, level 2 we don't tax too little, level 3 we tax too little. But if you were really being fair and doing proper historical analysis, it's possible that you could say that India doesn't spend too little. Again, I'm not saying these as definitive judgments. I'm saying that this is the way you should look at and think about these things over time. And yeah.
When you control for democracy, are you taking governance indicators?
Yeah, so democracy we control for indicators of political institutions.
That is World Bank governance.
No, we have there are all kinds of, there's Freedom House, there's also indicators that come from the University of Maryland. It's a political science database. There are many things. And when you do this, we did a lot of robustness checks, and you can satisfy yourselves that these results are robust or not. So now this is where we get into the question about the number of taxpayers. So India, I like to calculate two metrics. One is, of course, the dark blue line is the ratio of taxpayers to voting. This is again income taxes to voting population, and we find that India's thing is very low. And if you compare that in a cross-country context, now why do I like to do this? Because to me this is political and economic kind of institutions. Political institutions, voting, how many voting age people there are, what fraction of those pay taxes. And so this is one way of thinking about, has our economic and political development gone together? And we find that at least by this metric, we're not. We have far few taxpayers relative to voters than other countries do. Now, let me finish. Let me finish. So when we control for democracy and this, so we do the full-fledged analysis, you find that in fact there are far fewer taxpayers in India than in other countries, and we calculate that that 4.5 should be more like 23%, but actually so we could have an additional 1.65 crore taxpayers than we should. So this is, again, I'm saying this is a kind of rough calculation. Now we come to all the questions that were raised. Now, when someone says, like you rightly said, that you can explain this by saying that agriculture is not taxed, and therefore, but I would raise the question, why shouldn't we? I mean, I'm not, my friends, please don't get me into trouble. But the point is that, the question could be, that's either a fact explaining the result, or is a fact that begs a deeper question, why don't we do that? So I think there are two ways of thinking about it. So you could certainly make the case that, in terms of getting more taxpayers into the system, and this is, by the way, a very important objective for the government, which is to get more taxpayers into the net. Now, here's a very interesting China-India calculation. Yeah?
We've spoken about how development or growth has been inequitable. So is that income inequality because of which we don't have enough taxpayers?
Is the question that we don't have enough taxpayers because we have unequal growth? Well, one simple answer to the question is that, these were policy choices that were made rather than, inequality or whatever, right? I mean, after all, you could say, why should we leave out all sectors from taxation? We could say we should do them in. So I think part of these, I think, basically are political choices that we make. So just to give you one more example. So one of the very clever things that China has done is they have basically frozen the exemption limit for income taxes. And so what happens is that when exemption limits stay the same, as incomes rise naturally over time, and and especially if you're growing at 10% every year, plus inflation, more and more people come into the tax net. So in a sense, it's reform by stealth. You do nothing, you say I'm doing nothing, and automatically taxpayers come into the net. India, look at this. This is per capita income, and these are exemption limits. This has nothing to do with inequality, etc., etc. This is a very conscious policy choice that we've made, and so this is just one example. I mean, I don't want to get into agriculture; it's too controversial. But even a simple thing like this is something that we should think about. Why do we, this is a very conscious policy choice. We actually have exemption limits rising over time, and that's one reason why we don't have enough. Let me finish, and I'm going to give you. Yeah.
Why we are only discussing direct taxpayers? Because indirect tax.
See, I just told you at the beginning of the lecture that this is something that it's a kind of behavioral intuition that, and also an empirical thing that we found over time, that when people pay indirect taxes, you don't feel that same sense of skin in the game that it's when you pay income taxes, it's a very conscious act. You have to fill in a form, you have all this, and that's why people think there's something salient about income taxes that makes you feel more connected with the state than so this is just a kind of empirical fact. You go to the man on the street, he doesn't even know he's paying indirect taxes. So that's why we focus on income taxes and fees. So okay, let me just finish, I'll come back and then so now we come to, okay, how to increase tax collection in India. I've spoken about raising the exemption, but here's, I think, a couple of deeper truths. I'm going to address the bigger question that my friend from Kerala raised tomorrow. Remember that finally paying taxes can be paid in two ways, right? I mean, you can force people to pay taxes through stronger enforcement, or you can get voluntary tax paying compliance. Now, it is certainly the case that the more people think they are getting public goods or whatever in return for what they do, the more I think people are likely to pay taxes. The more you think, government is very corrupt, government is not doing anything for you, the rich are getting middle class subsidies. My friend only focuses on gold here. So, so if you have, and it's an important point. So if you think that you are not getting real value for money, then you will say, why should I voluntarily comply? So part of the challenge of, and remember that if you look at middle class India or upper middle class India, there's a famous Latin American economist who I really admire a lot and is very deeply insightful, is a man called Albert Hirschman. And he had a book called Exit, Voice and Loyalty. And basically what he was saying was, how do you bring about change in society? You can bring about through voice, which is, you say you fight and fight and fight, through competition, or you basically exit from the state. You exit and say, I don't want anything to do with this, I'm going to do. And when that happens, there is kind of less pressure on the state. So if you notice, for example, middle class, upper middle class India, they will say, government is hopeless, government is, corrupt. I will send my children to private schools. I will live in gated communities. I will get private security, etc., etc. So that is called exit from the state when you think, for example, that you are not getting enough services from the government. Again, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying right or wrong, but this is, when you think about taxation, I think these are all things that you have to keep in mind. that governments can do it through policy choices, through better enforcement. But ultimately, I mean, if you look around the world, in most advanced countries, people basically, obviously there's a lot of tax evasion that's going to happen everywhere, but finally, people pay taxes because they feel it's part of their citizenship duties, but also because they feel finally, they're getting something for their taxes, and that's why you get more voluntary tax compliance. So the lesson for India is that we have to do many things to bring more people into the tax net, JAM, digitization, going after black money, the sense that there's less corruption, better essential services. All these are important to bring more and more people into the tax net. And it's not just a matter of better enforcement, more tougher enforcement and so on. It's a much bigger issue because taxation is a lot about voluntary compliance. It's a lot about what you feel you get from the state and what you don't get from the state. Now, so I've only answered half your question because the punchline I want to reserve for tomorrow, but how do you reconcile this with redistribution as well? So I think this is the kind of perspective that I want you to have on fiscal capacity.
UK had some behavioral issues on tax, just on this. Can we have something like that?
So the question is that more and more governments are using kind of behavioral techniques. So the one example that you have is, so what you do is one experiment that they did. The tax department sends a notification to people in a community saying, in your community, 95% of the people pay taxes. So the remaining 5% are then shamed into thinking that they should also pay, and they do tricks like this, Yeah, so there are so that's also another way of doing this, but that's part of the kind of shaming people into paying taxes, and that also is, I think, very important. We can use these behavioral insights for this. Yes, please, yeah.
In the exemption graph, both the per capita income and exemption are in current prices, but unless we take them into real terms, I mean,
because remember, the tax limit is fixed in nominal terms. So it's nominal income rises that will get you into you're not calculating real GDP. You fix say the exemption limit in India, what is it, 2 lakhs? 2.5 lakhs. And if that's fixed, your income, your nominal income has to be more than 2.5 lakhs, not your real income.
So can you go to 21 number slide?
First, there's a question from there, the gentleman there. No, at the back. So this is both, I wanted to do taxation, but also about how you look at data. It's very important, pedagogical point here as well. Yeah, please.
So taking off from the question about inequality, what are your views on wealth tax or inheritance tax?
On inheritance tax, my friend, all of you want to get me into trouble, again and again you ask me for my views. I will give you my views on the inheritance tax, I think offline, but let me just tantalizingly leave it as that, intergenerational, I think equity is probably very important, and so let me leave it at that.
Sir,
Yeah.
sir, when we see that ratio of taxpayer to voting age population, in that voting age population, some people must be exempted and some people must be evading maybe. So if we divide that data and then we see the ratios, will that change? Will that have some impact?
See, finally, I'm not trying to, clearly there are some who are evading, clearly who are some who are not part of the net. I'm just showing this as a fact of, this number is very low, no matter how you look at it. I mean, that's the point. But you can do all these detailed calculations as well. Yeah, the lady there, please. I'm not going to break now. We're just going to go.
Sir, when we are talking about the number of taxpayers, so we know that in today's era there is a lot of skilled migration
which is accepted as in brain drain, and even if we take the case of IIT, so many number of skilled migration is happening. So is there can be any provision where we can tax those because they have availed the subsidized education, not even the education but even if the health, can there be any provision where we can include them in taxes?
So who, the migrants?
Yeah, skilled migrants.
Who you mean who leave the country?
Yeah, who left the country, even if the case.
So
Very clever.
So it's a
maybe
very
voluntary, or maybe because see they have taken the subsidized education, not even if the education in any form like health or maybe some other form, but now because after taking the education now they have left the country. So
all I can say is that I now pay my taxes. Yeah. So okay. So I'm told that I mean, I have two. I mean, smaller sections to go through. Either I'm told on the one hand you were here till 1:30. You want a break, but if you want, my preference would be to just move on. I'm in your hands. Move.
How do you have a 145 or 150%
Iceland, sir.
taxpayers to the voting age population?
145.
Yeah.
150.
My migrants, exact. Someone said migrants or whatever, but we'll check that. Yeah. We'll check that. Yeah.
For that country, sir, the taxation age limit and the voting right age
Could,
limit
could be different. Yeah.
That can be different, but does it
Sorry. Couple, you want to say something? Into the mic. So the question is, how can the number be greater than 100?
One of the reason is like what he was trying. Another thing is those students who get the scholarship. On scholarships also there are the taxes. So if you are getting any kind of stipend,
Okay. So I mean, no. So I think the details we can talk offline. I think we should, if you don't mind, let's move on because we have. A pure question. Give me a pure question.
Why 85% of Indian farmers is less than 1 hectare? And who has seen their balance sheet? Everybody is talking about insolvency of the industry and other thing. But when it comes to agriculture, discussion is about withdrawal of the subsidy. Discussion is about the taxation of the agriculture. How many balance sheet of the how many people have seen the balance sheet of the farmers?
Sir, why don't you recruit him to your party? My friend? He should be a neta here. Maybe, but don't tell me I'm coming to a very dangerous conclusion. Shall I tell you? Are all teachers in this country really netas?
No.
Okay. No, I'm joking. Yeah, it's a good question. So it's a good question. But I think that it's yeah.
I can give the answer, but I give opinions only on chargeable basis.
Okay, good. Okay, so let's move on. I want to do something very quickly on spending. You can do the same, because there is a real criticism against the Indian state that it spends too little, especially on health and education, on social services. Lots of people on the left make this criticism. And you can do the same analysis that we did earlier, and you find something very similar, that controlling for the level of income, India doesn't underspend even on social, but for a democracy, maybe it does underspend. Here, I just want to take you through very quickly through something we did in the survey. Now, what we did in last year's survey was this, that if you said that if you're a government and if you're really seeking value for money, in terms of how much bang for the buck you could get for money, what does the evidence say gives you the most returns for your spending? And this is evidence from research from all over the world. And I hope we have the chart. Yeah. Okay, so this is the chart which says that actually, so what this chart is, it's all these dots basically are research evidence from around the world. And what you see is that on the right hand, on the horizontal axis is age of the child. On the y-axis is some measure of outcome that we're interested in. So effect on test scores is on the vertical axis. Effect on adult incomes is on the y-axis. And what this graph is, and the dots are referred to particular interventions or government programs. For example, iodine supplementation, early life nutrition, nutritional supplement. Down, as you go down the age of the child, improving teacher quality. So each dot represents a study from around the world. And what this chart is essentially saying is that if you look at the evidence, the returns to invest appear highest for programs that target young children and in utero health. That is, my friend, I hope it's a question. My friend, when you have a bivariate thing, if the regression is like this, if the line, this will also be the regression line. This is the regression line of a bivariate relationship. And so, when you can get more sophisticated, but this is the regression line in this. You can say that not enough data points and all of that, but that's a different question. That's a different question. But this is basically Stata gives you the line of best fit on this, and so by definition, that's the regression line. Now, I mean, the point is that, see, remember that it's not as if there are no, for example, there are some interventions here that don't give enough returns, but broadly we see, and this is consistent with more and more literature which says that what happens in the early life of the child, or early life means not just born, but also in utero, what happens there are very critical for the cognitive development or the mental development of children. And in fact, it starts earlier. It starts with pregnant women and women, because the health of the mother determines what happens in the womb, that determines the development of the child, and that in turn affects their performance. So for example, you also see that if the early life has been good, their ability to absorb information, to learn better over time also improves. A lot of this work has been done by James Heckman, a Nobel Prize winner, and really establishing that early life is critical for children, and early life not just for the child, but also includes the health of the mother, very critical. So essentially, so we had a chapter called Mother and Child to kind of document some of this evidence for other countries and for India. And one of the things we find is that, okay, we know, I've told you, these are all, simple evidence about how early life matters. Infant mortality rates are negatively correlated with GDP growth over 20 years. So there's a lot of, it's not just one thing. Human capital is very important, and human capital is built crucially at early stages of a child's life. And so, so one of the interesting things is this, that Indian women on average are too thin when they begin pregnancy, and they do not gain enough weight during pregnancy. So they gain 7 kilograms on average compared to 12 to 18 kilograms recommended by WHO for underweight women. So this is a chart which shows that. You see India is off the charts. This is the initial weight. This is the weight gain. It's a kind of convergence type thing that should happen. The weaker you start off with, the more you should gain. And that's what happens in most countries. But in India, that doesn't happen enough. So I've been through all this. This is the whole logic of this. And if you look at, for example, one of the indicators of the health of a child is what we call height for age. What is the height for age at different stages of a child's life? And this is a chart which shows urban, rural, the 2005-6 numbers are below. The red line is more recent data. We find that there has been some improvement over time, but you see that there's still a difference between urban and rural. They're all both on the same scale. But most significantly, height for age has to do with what's called stunting, and there is a big, not uncontroversial literature, there is a bit of controversy around that, that says that Indian children are not tall enough for their age. In fact, they're substantially less tall, 2 standard deviations shorter than the health average. So if you were to do this cross-country line, you would probably find that India is off the mark. The controversy is because people will say, oh, but should we use the same international metric for all children? Yes or no? Should we take account of the fact maybe there are special conditions in India? But just looking at the evidence, there seems to be something going on here that, the children in India are, and you saw, it's related to what happens to mothers' pregnancy. It's possible that we don't spend enough in terms of the early life of the child and in utero, and that for the mother. Now, also this has something to do with open defecation. India doesn't do very well compared to even our neighboring countries. And what we find is that there are, I think, costs associated with that. So the blue line is, what is the average child height for age of households when they defecate in the open. The red line is when they don't defecate in the open. You see that there's a difference, a big private benefit. But the more interesting thing is that what happens in terms of this chart over time, what you find is that as more and more of the village defecates out in the open, actually stunting rises. So there's a social externality or a cost associated with open defecation, and that's why I think the Swachh Bharat program of the government is really a very critical piece of a very critical program to change some of these social practices as well. I was asked for my views on biolatrines. I pleaded guilty and ignorant, but I think there is some literature on, even in the case of, when these toilets are set up, these dry latrines are set up, why maybe they don't are used as often as they should be. There is some literature on that, and there's an EPW article which you can read on that. So essentially the bottom line, so the National Food Security Act, for example, does provide for mothers receiving pregnant mothers receiving 6,000. I think that, I think the Prime Minister also on December 30th or 31st, when he made the speech, he said this was going to be reinforced. I do think that this is a very critical intervention. Anything that we can do to build on, to make sure that the early life of the child and the mother is good, actually has a lot importance over time. And these are some examples we found of what are the early, this is from the literature, what are the early life interventions that could help, breastfeeding. If you look at the survey, for example, we find something remarkable in India, very positive. We find breastfeeding rates have gone up enormously, even over the course of 7 or 8 years. And it's gone up more in states that started off very low. So it's a very encouraging sign. Breastfeeding can improve the life of the child, and that's something that we do. Vitamin A supplements, deworming around the world has been shown. So this is just an example of one particular aspect of social sector policies related to health that one can teach in the class based on, you can build it around Swachh Bharat, you can build it around dry latrines, biolatrines, whatever your thing is, but then expose students to this kind of evidence. Now, so we did health, one aspect. I'm going to do education very briefly, and then we're going to call it a day. So a lot of what I'm going to show comes from data from ASAR, the Annual Survey of Education Reports. And actually it's a very simple story but a very powerful story that emerges on education, on primary education in India. What we find is that over time, the physical amenities are improving. Whether you talk about drinking water, toilets, girls' toilets, a library, midday meal, these have been rising over time. I think we need to do more, for example, on some of these things. But there's a steady upward increase in the physical amenities. And enrollment has gone up substantially. So this is a 45-degree line where the axes are scaled perfectly, unlike yesterday's graph. The enrollment in 2006, enrollment 2016. Madhya Pradesh is an outlier for some reason. I don't know why. We should check that. But you see all the states are above the line. And you look at Bihar. I mean, enrollment in 2006 and 2012, just a massive jump in Bihar, which shows that, I think whatever was done during that period had enormous effects, giving cycles, whatever, has had some impact in terms of enrollment. And you see, so we want enrollment, of course, to be 100% all over India. We're getting, in some of the southern states, we're getting close, but I think that this is very good news. What we also find is that private school enrollment is rising steadily. We find, for example, it has gone up from about 16-17% now. So 30% of children in India now go to private schools, and that's been rising. And of course, there's a lot of variation within India on this. So here's the interesting thing. Student attendance is high, but it is still not 100%. So, so enrollment is one thing. So remember, facilities have gone up, enrollment has increased, but attendance is not close to enrollment. So student attendance is, and there's a lot of variation. For example, in Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, Manipur, for example, student attendance is well below 60%. So, yeah, there are dropouts for all kinds of reasons. So I think you see, and this is based on, you go and do a random test of children in school, and you find this. Now I'm going to ask something. This is the next statistic. I hope all of you do better on this one. Teacher attendance. How many of you show up to teach your students? I wish I could do a random test. I wish I had evidence. My friend, I wish I had evidence for all of you. 100%, 110%. Yeah, exactly. No, I'm joking. So teacher attendance, it is, see, I think that there is an impression which, and here different studies say different things. I have come across studies that say that teacher attendance in India is about 75%, so it's basically 70 to 85%. But this is not, so there's another statistic which I'm not showing you, that you can say how many teachers don't show up, how many teachers show up but don't teach. So if you add up these two, it's I think closer to 40 to 50% in India. So this is, I think, still something that needs to be. Only government schools. Only government. We don't know what the private. Yeah. Sorry. School teacher, absolutely. And then, but I think that, so enrollment has gone up, facilities have gone up, attendance is high but not high enough. Teacher attendance, I mean, anything less than 100% is inexcusable, of course. No, but of course, remember that, I should be careful here. Attendance can be less than 100 also because you're entitled to leave. So I think if you factor in leave, maybe it could be a little bit less. But I know that all of you take no leave at all, regardless of circumstances, and you're always there. So for you, the standard should be 100%. Yeah, primary school, yeah, primary school.
And then 85, they are not coming at the same scale also.
No, that's because there will be decimal points. There will be decimal points.
Don't think so, because it cannot be in that case. 84,
My friends, all this will be cleaned up. We'll fix it for you. Don't worry. My friends, just have a look at this, and then. But the most important, I think, the most important point is this. And in the latest Economist, they have 2 articles on this as well. That essentially that learning levels are poor. You see this, a number of children in standard 3 who can't do standard 2 text or subtraction. This is 25 and 27%. Look at some of the states, there's a lot of variation, but the average number is very, very low. And most disturbing of all, it's been declining. So So in primary education, at least, the overall picture seems to be very clear and simple. We're building more facilities where students are enrolling more. Their attendance is high, but not as high as it should be. Teacher attendance is high, but certainly not as high as it should be. But learning outcomes are, so in some ways the government has now adopted this and said, we have to focus on learning. Niti Aayog, for example, is creating all these indicators across states of what are the learning outcomes, and as a way of putting, kind of peer pressure to create this thing. So this is something that, I haven't done secondary education. I haven't done, higher education. Just not enough time to cover all these things. But in your classrooms, please, you could devote more time to all of these. But the takeaway from today is I want you to first think about what are public institutions, what does it mean to have state capacity, the 5 functions that governments perform, how India does on various measures of state capacity. I want you to think certainly about taxes in a kind of bigger context, not just about evasion, this, that, and the other. I mean, there's a much bigger issue related to taxes, how we should think about taxes, and that's something that I think pedagogically is very important. There are lots of issues in health that I haven't covered. You could do a whole course on health economics, but last year we thought that let's focus on mother and child, which I think it's a. So just as an aside, I have to tell you that a small bit of self-praise for my team and me. The first year we were accused of being capitalists because we focused on subsidies for the poor. Then to satisfy my friend here, I knew he would show up. I said I want to do gold and show that we also give a lot of subsidies to the middle class and the rich. But the other thing that I think that we wanted to do in every survey was to focus on some issue of importance to women, and last year we focused on mother and child. In the latest survey we have something on also on sanitation for women and things like that, and raised the question about whether women should have some kind of right to physical privacy and so on. So those are issues we raised. But so we focused on that, and of course on education. So think of this module as state capacity, tax capacity, and some aspects on the spending side, health and education, many more issues. But also there were some, I think, important pedagogical things that we talk about. How do you assess even whether things are too high or too low? So I want you to take away many things from this session, and now I'm open to questions. Yeah. Now one at a time. Questions.
Sir, my question is regarding the open defecation. The chart that you have shown, India and South Asian countries, it is very evident that open defecation is not because of that deprivation of education or excess of drinking water and income, other things. There are some different issues that we are facing.
Cultural and social norms. Social, absolutely.
Exactly. Yeah. And more going ahead, that untouchability that we had in our historical relevance, that is also playing very important role. That people don't want to have a latrine in their home. It is more about spiritual than physical. So.
Yeah, that's a good point. There is some evidence which shows that, in fact, even where people have latrines in their home, they don't want to use it because they don't want to clean it themselves, because of this history of caste and untouchability and so on. So and there is some evidence on that, absolutely. The lady here will have people who've asked fewer questions will get priorities, I think. Convergence, exactly, yeah. Absolutely, convergence. So I'm proud of you. All the concepts that I'm teaching, you're picking up. You're picking up.
Okay. So the first question is about the taxation. So do you think when we analyze the taxation, whether India is taxing more or less, should the the proportion of employment also come into the picture? What proportion of total population is employed and all? This is one question, and the second is this is regarding the learning outcome in the primary government schools. So when there is a shift from the government school to private school, So we can expect that those who are, higher level of income, they're sending their children to the private schools. In that case, unfortunately, probably it's expected that the learning outcome in a percentage term will fall over the time.
Why? Because, sorry?
Because see, I mean, if those who are richer, even in the rural setup, they'll all send their children in the private schools.
Okay, so
right?
good, very good. So two very good points. The first point was on, taxation relates to employment. I would argue that to some extent, when you therefore say measure tax relative to the level of development, that captures some of that automatically, because in poorer countries you'll have probably less formal employment, and that captures that to some extent, but not captures it perfectly, and you can do more. The second question is a very interesting question. It's what we call a kind of selection effect in economics. So essentially the question is the following, right? That you have government schools and you have private schools. These are data on government schools. So supposing the rich take people out, you will, and more over time, you might find a natural decline in this. And that's, I think, I don't know whether that's true or not, but that's something that should be checked. The only thing I would say is the following, that it turns out, as an empirical matter, it turns out that the cost of private schools is actually not that high in India, because teachers are paid something like 1/3 or 1/4 in private schools relative to this. We also find, for example, in some work that some Indian and other economists have done, we see very clearly that the growth in private school is not so much related to income levels, but highly correlated with the dysfunctionality of government schools. So there's a strong correlation there. Now, whether that should translate into a declining or thing, that I think we need to study. But both very good questions, yeah.
Just a clarification I want. You have chosen height for age every time. But I suppose weight for height is a better indicator than weight for age and height for age?
No, so here this is a very good question, but again, I'm not the expert on this, but I know that development literature, everything, it's the height that is a much better correlate of cognitive development and mental development and performance over time. In fact, over time, historically, you'll see there are studies which show that over time, even across the advanced world, the way you measure development is by height, not by weight. Because remember, with I think a height for age is better, because weight complicates matters, because you can be poor. I mean, for example, obesity is something that it's not necessarily a good thing. So I'm told that height for age is the better measure. Yeah, it's called So your question here, you never asked a question. Yes, please.
Sir, I don't have a question, but I have an observation.
Yeah.
If we come back,
he is allowed an observation because he's not asked questions.
If you come back to slide number 43 and 44,
43 and 44.
there is an interesting observation that in terms of students' attendance, there is a state-wise variance.
Yeah.
So the bad perform states can learn from the better perform states.
Yeah.
But in terms of teachers' attendance, so it's similar almost.
Yeah, that's true. That's a very good point. So I would say that's a really good point. Actually, very good point. Now I was looking at this, and clearly you see that children attendance. I think I'm shocked at that West Bengal, by the way. If this is true, my Marxist friends have a lot to answer for here. I don't know why that's, but generally you see that the bottom two rows are states that are generally poorer and so on. So that is consistent with our priors. West Bengal, I mean, for the first time I'm seeing it, it's like strikes me. But it's true that the greater uniformity in government it's an excellent point, something I hadn't focused on or realized, but it's something that.
Which is because of midday meal effectiveness programs, these kind of programs.
No, but then why don't children show up? Why don't children? Children. Okay, but these are done randomly. So these are random timings.
Not random, sir. We did in a survey, and
that means teachers behave in a uniform.
Yeah. So that is, teachers are uniformly fantastic. Okay. But it's a really good observation. I hadn't thought of that, and we should find out. Maybe all of you should find out. Maybe in the next MOOC, maybe 20 years down the line, might Zubair and Kapil, when they do the MOOC, they will give answers to this question. Okay.
Sir, at least in the case of...
That's after this. After you. First you, see. Please give him the mic after this.
Sir, at least in the case of Bihar and Madhya Pradesh, many of these are para-teachers. They are not proper teachers. They are hired on a temporary basis. So I don't know how that affects all this dynamics. The second thing is, sir, I teach social policy and also history of development. And one thing that has really, always becomes a point of discussion among students is that, we discuss England, France, Germany, US, and then we come to Japan, and then we come to all the contemporary cases. And you said yesterday that no country has become rich without becoming industrialized. But at least in the cases Japan onwards and also the East Asian cases, social policy has played a very important role. Education and health, the states have really invested in education and health. And India somewhere is the only outlier, the only possible exception in the entire gamut of cases that we teach in a course of history of development. And you also refer to Myron Weiner's book, and he has a possible explanation. He says that it is in the mind. It is policymakers, social activists, NGOs, left-wingers, right-wingers, all of them agree to one thing, that there is no point teaching students who cannot there are two kinds of people in the society, people who work with the hand and people who work with the head, and there's no point teaching everyone. We can always, education can work as a social filter, it's like that. So what are, students ask us a question, why India is the only exception in the world? Why India has not been able to do it? What do we say?
So that's a great observation. I think also that if you look at Korea, for example, right? Or if you look at China, I mean, I don't know whether you know that Mao, when Mao Zedong, first took over, guess what is the first thing he did? In ancient Chinese society, in order for the woman to, look beautiful or whatever, they would bind their feet. And the first social act that he took was to say, now foot binding is abolished. And that was kind of, so Mao also, therefore, they emphasized a lot primary education, and the Chinese state did well. Korea in the 60s under General Park did that also. So I think it's a good point. I think we should teach this. I think Myron Weiner himself provides some answers in his book, because he talks about, certainly in Western Europe, he says that the church had a lot to do with the spread of literacy. I think cites the example of Sweden. I think that in India, I'm sure there are some cultural, and kind of maybe even religious explanations for why, if you believed in a stratified society, then perhaps, saying that, some can learn, some don't have to learn, that probably goes with that. But of course, the puzzle is, the puzzle to some extent, the political puzzle is that why did someone who actually who completely bought into, modernity and etc., I'm talking about, Nehru and people, why they didn't do more to push basic education? And that's, I think, the bit of an open question. And of course, as I told you that, one explanation was, it was a state subject, or so he said, maybe I don't have enough influence, therefore let the states do it. But the states didn't do it. And then over time, we've kind of come into this situation. But I think the need for, absolute basic primary education and health for all citizens, based on learning outcomes, not just on attendance, I think is very, very important. How we're going to change that, I don't know. But you're absolutely right that, and Myron Weiner is right, and others are right, that there are deeper, I think, there are political reasons why this may have not happened, but there are maybe deeper cultural reasons as well. Yeah, the gentleman there.
Good evening, sir.
Sorry, but just one. See, one more thought occurred to me is that now, if you look at the this is something that I used to think about 10 years ago, and I've kind of revised my mind on this. I used to think that, we didn't do this. That was a mistake, of course. I think it was very important. But I got the sense that when India started increasing, right, the returns to education would kind of be the motor that got more people into education. So remember that one thing is that why wasn't the supply of education good? But then you could say, part of it was because the returns weren't great. And I thought that the demand for education going up via, rapid growth, and that did happen to some extent. The returns to education did go up, enrollment did go up, but of course, it happened of a particular sort. It didn't happen necessarily in primary education. It happened, getting vocational, getting computer skills, English language coaching and all of those. So that dynamic did happen to some extent, but certainly by no means enough to offset, and no means at the right stage to offset the historical anomaly that you noted. Yeah, sorry. This is my friend from the Andaman and Nicobar Islands.
So thank you, sir.
So he gets an applause for the man who's come from the furthest distance.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, all of you. But I couldn't find any data of Andaman Nicobar Island.
If I had known this, I would have not have given him a round of applause. B, a very good point. I think this is something that I just don't know whether I don't know, the government data are just not. So I don't know. You have to, you have to start doing something about it. I don't know. Maybe the Ministry of Union Territories, I think we have to, the thing is that, remember that, you have to believe that data are important for this to happen. And how you do that, you have to, my friend Saul, I don't have answers to this. You have to, put pressure on the government, and all of you should say this is actually very important for Andaman's development. If you don't know what's happening, you don't know what to do.
We'll work together, sir. We'll explore the possibilities. Sir, one more thing regarding the teacher attendance. We have conducted a study, sir. In some panchayat we have chosen. We did before and after the implementation of Pradhan Mantri Gram Sadak Yojana, road infrastructure development.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Before that, the teacher attendance was very less, less than 30% below. But after the road and all the transport facilities very good, and even autos or share autos, rickshaws, everything playing that particular road, the attendance was very high, sir, after that. So infrastructure also it is...
very good point. It's an excellent point. And also, it kind of reinforces the point that was made earlier by one of you, that when we talk about cost, benefit, and externalities, from railways, we should also do, I think you said that, to roads, and I think that's a very good example of that. Very good point, yeah. So that's another, beautiful research topic as well. Yeah, you haven't spoken, so you get a chance, absolutely.
I just have a small observation on this chart which you had shown, sharp decline in the percentage of standard 5 children learning levels. Possibly the decline might be because of we don't have an examination system till class 5. Yeah, till class 6. So the learning is not tested. So that might be the reason why the students, whether they learn or they don't learn, they are just pushed from one class to the other class. It's just an observation.
True. No, see, remember that again, I have seen evidence in other places where, if you have a test, you teach to the test rather than teach more generally. So on the one hand, I can see that not having a test, has certain downsides. But there's also evidence that shows that if you have a test, then the teaching happens to the test and you don't get the best possible kind of teaching. So how you balance the two is kind of an open question. But after all, we took away the plus 10 exam, right? And now I think we're thinking of going back. So I don't know how to read the evidence. I think it's very complicated. Yeah, into the mic, please.
But these tests which we are testing, that we are testing division and subtraction. We are not testing the general out in general what their general knowledge or something like that. So it's like quality of education. So we are like testing the general thing which we are going to test if there is a test at class 5th level or that thing.
I think in fact now they're going to do something similar for classes 6 to 8. No, 8 to 12. No, 8 to 12. I think so. Let's see how the results come out. Yeah, but the point is that this is a problem, regardless of whether you're not testing other things or testing. This is a serious problem.
So how important is the role of language and medium of teaching in private schools? Because I have seen that when we try to teach the children of maids and all, the problem is they don't understand English. And all the subject books are in English. Even subjects like history, they are just mugging it up. They don't know even what is the meaning of then what is the point of teaching them in English?
Yeah, so I guess that, by the way, that prompts me, I'm going to answer your question. A team and everyone, I would like when the MOOC is put up finally, they should have Hindi subtitles to this. And then at some point we should have also, subtitles in all the Indian languages. So that's maybe too grand an idea. But I think coming back to the question, I think that, I think we should start certainly by teaching them in their language so that some basic skills are acquired. And then maybe over time, we can have them learn other languages. But certainly the teaching has to be done to their level and whatever, because some basic things have to be acquired. And if it's easier done in the local vernacular, it should be done. We should not foist, English on children and in circumstances when they will not be able to learn. Absolutely. Okay, so.
Sir, I have a question. Sir, I have a question.
Yeah, last question.
Do you think that private coaching can affect the attendance of both children or a student or a teacher?
Sorry,
private coaching. The tuitions or the coaching which is privately taken can affect the attendance of both student and the teacher, because government schools do not provide such an incentive or the remuneration they get and what they can earn like in the private tuition.
Yeah, so are you saying that if children get private coaching, that will increase attendance or decrease? Oh, see, but then you could argue that they get private coaching because teaching is not good. So the private coaching reflects something that's gone wrong in this. Yeah, but the same teachers, yeah, but then that's possible. Certainly that's possible, yeah, absolutely. Okay, thank you very much. See you tomorrow, last day tomorrow. Photograph. I thought we've had so many photographs, but we have to have one with the whole group. Yeah. Yeah, come. Okay.
Sir, I have another question, but I'll ask.